Hey guys, welcome back to the poker vlog. This is episode number 11. I hope you all had a great Valentine's Day. I had a really fun one. My girlfriend and I, we did a wine and paint. We didn't paint the coolest thing in the whole world, but you know, sometimes you gotta make sacrifices. Still had a really good time. My cousin was actually in town and wanted to hang out, so he stopped by. For some reason, they wouldn't let him actually inside the studio for whatever reason.
When you think there's enough purple in there as well.
I can't believe it's 2017 and they still won't let certain giraffes in art studios. Thanks, Trump. Anyway, for this episode, we go back to my favorite casino in Las Vegas, the Red Rock. We play with some familiar people and we get into some difficult spots. And I honestly think that we play the most interesting session that I've videoed since we've started. So let's go ahead and get to it. Hi, can you please put Brad O on the list for 2-5?
Okay, Brad.
Thanks.
Welcome, bye.
Bye. Here we are back on the home court at the Red Rock. The under the gun player in this hand limps in. I look down at ace king offsuit. I actually didn't notice the limper, so I raised to 15. Ordinarily, I'd make it 20 in this situation. The small blind calls and the under the gun player calls as well. We go 3 ways to the flop. The flop comes 10-3 deuce with 2 clubs. Both players check. And normally, I like to check back here because ace-king has some showdown value. We don't necessarily need to c-bet as a bluff with it. In this particular hand, I switch it up and bet 25. The flop isn't going to be crushing my pre-flop betting range, so I expect to get called by a wide range of holdings from players who are still not convinced I have a big hand. The small blind folds and the player under the gun calls. The turn is the queen of diamonds. It's a high card, which is much better for my range than it is for his pre-flop limp calling range. He checks and I bet 70. This is a pretty big bet designed to get a fold out of some weak hands that might have called a flop bet. Some of the hands I'd expect to fold at this point would be gut shot straight draws, pocket pairs below 10s that didn't make a set, possibly some small flush draws, and maybe even a pair of 10s. The opponent ends up calling and now I'm somewhat concerned. The river is the ace of clubs, and it's a weird card. The flush and 2 straights get there, but I have top, and my opponent now bets 70 into a pot of 240. A lot of people would probably just call at this point, since top pair, top kicker is a pretty good hand, and we're getting a good price. My thought is a little different. Several hands got there on the river, and my opponent is betting less than 1/3 pot, which in my mind signifies weakness. My read is that he probably has a hand with some value, but he's scared I have him beat, and 70 might just be the final amount he's willing to invest. Too often we'll be losing in this spot if we call, so I raise to 250. If he has a hand worse than ace-king, then raising for value is fine, even though we don't expect to get a call. And if he has 2 pair, a set, a straight, or a low flush, it's going to put him in a really tough spot. I have a lot of history with this player, and I've shown him the best hand numerous times in situations like this. So he goes into the tank for several minutes, and actually gave me permission to use the audio of what he said, so let's take a listen.
Really? Top pair with a flush draw, and then got the flush on the river? Got a higher flush in it? 10 of clubs, king 10. That would be a fucking cooler, huh?
Nice hand. He seemed like he was on the verge of folding, but he ultimately makes a good call with 6-5 of clubs for the flush. He was basically at the top of his range for the line that he took, and now we're stuck several hundred right out of the gate. Well, that was an interesting hand. Bluff didn't go over too well. it happens. I thought I'd built up enough credibility with him to maybe get him to fold an ace, 2 pair, maybe a set somehow, and maybe even a small flush. He thought about it for a long time, so anytime you make a play and it gets people to think, it puts them in a tough spot, I think that's usually an indication that the play isn't horrible. I'm gonna hold off on bluffing now for a little while. Sucks to bluff off a lot of money right in the beginning because you have to kind of tighten up. It takes some of your tools away for the rest of the session. Just need to wait for a good hand now. But when I do make a good hand, I think it'll be a lot easier for me to get paid at this point, that's for sure. Time to get some food at the old tropical smoothie. Regroup a little bit. Several hours after regrouping, I find myself back in the action. It's a straddle pot, 2 people limped in, the small blind calls. I look down at ace-3 of clubs and call as well. The straddler on the button checks and we go 5 ways to the flop. The flop comes 8-3 deuce rainbow. I have middle pair with an overcard and a backdoor straight flush draw. It checks to the middle position limper who bets 25 into 50, folds back to me, and I call with big plans for the turn if I get a card that improves my hand. The turn is the 7 of clubs. I check and my opponent bets 50. At this point, I don't have a great idea of what he has. He might only have an 8, but a lot of players limp in pre-flop with big hands and straddle pots, thinking that straddlers are almost automatically going to raise once it gets back to them. I also have to keep in mind that he bet into 4 other players on the flop, so he probably has a decent hand. My guess would be a hand like ace-8, pocket 9s, or possibly something better. This doesn't stop me though. I raised to 165. I'm representing a 2 pair or better hand with this move. I have a blocker to pocket 3s, which makes it less likely he has a set. The flop was very dry, so I'd probably play a really strong hand the exact same way, and if he doesn't fold, I'll have a ton of outs. He's a new player that didn't see me bluff earlier. There's no real reason for him to suspect that I'm bluffing now, but ultimately he does find a call. The river is a 4, and it's not the suit we were hoping for. After he calls on the turn, I put him on an overpair. He's a rec player. I don't know if he'd be able to let an overpair go. My head is saying check fold, but my heart is saying bomb it. I'm not one to give up easily, so I bet 400 into 430. Before all my chips are even in there, he calls with a set of 3s. It's a little unfortunate that he is basically at the top of his range here, but there were some clues earlier that would indicate that he had a big hand. I just didn't really pay attention to him. Alright, it's 3 o'clock. I've been playing for about 4.5 hours. Down $1,000, 0 for 2 on big bluffs today. Unfortunately, I tried to get a little creative and it didn't quite work out for me. Not too big of a deal though. I'm just gonna hang in there, hopefully turn this session around a little bit. Once we get back to the table, our nemesis, when we tried to bluff with ace-king, limps in. We look down at queen-jack offsuit in the cutoff. Usually when I'm second in the pot in good position, I don't like to limp, so I raise here to 20. It folds back to our nemesis, who calls. He's actually a pretty nice guy. We go heads up to the flop, and it comes king, queen, 6 with 2 diamonds. We have middle pair with a backdoor straight and backdoor flush draw. Our opponent checks, and we bet 15. We most likely have the best hand. We don't really want to give him a free card, but we are value betting and trying to get called by a worse hand, so we don't need to bet too much. He calls, and the turn is the jack of diamonds. This gives us 2 pair and the second nut flush draw, but our opponent may have hit this card as well. He checks, we bet 45, and he tanks, then raise it up to 110. Probably not ahead, but there's no hand that we're drawing dead to, and we're getting a good price to see the river, so we call, and we're planning on folding if we don't improve. The river is the 7 of spades. It's a complete blank. Our opponent bets 110 again. This is starting to feel eerily similar to the first hand we played against him when he bet the same amount on the river that was bet on the turn. Instead of calling or raising this time though, I've learned my lesson and I fold. After my cards are in the muck, he turns over ace-10 off with no diamond. He has a straight and we're sort of getting smoked, but at least we've made a disciplined fold, and that's not always easy to do in the midst of a losing session. Now we have ace-queen offsuit in early position. We raised to 15. It folds back to the big blind, who is an older Asian lady with a stack of 280. She plays pretty straightforward for the most part, but sometimes she gets restless and makes some strange plays. We get into one other pot with her later on as well. She calls and we go heads up to the flop. It comes ace-7-5 with 2 hearts. She checks, we bet 20, and she raises it up to 50. Despite thinking we're behind, our ability to fold has significantly diminished since we've just been getting crushed all day. We call, and the turn is the ace of spades. Not too bad of a card. She bets 105, leaving herself with 110. I raise enough to cover her. She calls. The river is the 6 of diamonds. She turns over ace-king, and we feel like we are stuck in a washing machine. Nothing's really gone right today, but sometimes that's just how poker is. Here we pick up ace-8 suited on the button. I raise to 15, the small blind calls, and the big blind raises it up to 65. The big blind is a buddy of mine. He plays mostly tight and straightforward, but is always on the lookout for opportunities to 3-bet. He knows that I could be opening with a wide range on the button, and in his mind it probably looks like a good time to put on a squeeze. I'm thinking that he could be 3-betting light here, but instead of 4-betting, I flat, knowing that for him, playing a big pot out of position could be even more terrifying. I might make the same play with pocket kings or aces as a trap, hoping he'd bluff a few streets before I raise, but in this case, I'm flatting because I know he's capable of making big folds, and I'm planning on bluffing at some point in the hand. The small blind also calls, and we go 3 ways to the flop. The flop comes 9-6-6 with 2 hearts and 1 spade. The small blind checks. My buddy in the big blind bets 95. If I'm calling 65 pre-flop, I'm definitely not going anywhere with an overcard and backdoor straight and backdoor flush draws. I call, and I have tons of hands that I can represent on the turn. Like I said before, I can still have high pocket pairs, I can have flush draws, straight draws, trip sixes, etc. Him and I have a long history, and I generally play very straightforward against him, only raising when I've had it. Plus, he tends to level himself a little bit and seems to always look for ways that he's beat. Once I call, the small blind folds, and the turn is the 2 of hearts. My buddy bets 225 into 385, and this shouldn't be a very good card for him. It's starting to feel like he's firing with air. If he raised pre-flop with a legitimate hand, then only a few hands like aces with the ace of hearts or ace-king and ace-queen of hearts are gonna like this turn enough to fire a second bullet. If he has an overpair, he should just plan on check calling. It's possible that he 3-bet light with a hand like ace-3 through ace-5 suited of hearts, or another hand that contains a 6, but if he's 3-betting with those, then there are tons of other hands that he could be 3-betting with that wouldn't connect with this board at all. Given the fact that he wasn't at the table for my previous bluffs, and I haven't attempted any bluffs against him in a long time, I follow through with my original plan to make a move, and I shove for 615 more. He tanks for over a minute, and then ultimately folds. He told me that the play seemed suspect, but also thought I might have trapped him with a big pair pre-flop. Finally, we get one of our bluffs to go through, but we also risked $1,000 of our own money to win $450 of our opponent's money. Bluffing in these situations just has to work so often for it to be worth it, and most of the time in small stakes games, it just doesn't. People love to call, and when we bluff at them, it plays right into their weaknesses. This is the last interesting hand of the session. We pick up ace-8 suited again, only this time in the cutoff. We open to 15, our buddy calls in the small blind, and the woman who doubled up against us when we both had trip aces calls in the big blind. We go 3 ways to the flop, and it comes ace-ace-king, both players check. I bet 35, The small blind folds and the big blind calls with around 150 remaining. The turn is the jack of diamonds. She fiddles around with her chips, almost pretending to go all in at one point. It seems like she's trying to get a read out of me or is trying to look intimidating. This is a fairly common tell that she's weak. She probably has a hand with some showdown value, but wants me to be scared and wants me to check back. I bet 25 just to give her an opportunity to do something silly. She doesn't quite bite, she just calls. The river comes out and it's the 8 of hearts. She snap shoves. I don't want to slow roll. I call, I turn over my hand. She turns over king queen off and I take it down. All right, won 2 nice pots with the ace 8, so that's good. I'm in for 2,400. I've got about 1,500 in front of me. I don't know what's gotten into me today, man. I just felt like bluffing a lot, and I think people's image of me is going to be a little bit different from this point on. I've been playing tight for a while, like the last couple weeks here at Red Rock. I felt like I had a lot of credibility, and when that happens, you need to mix it up a little bit, put some doubt in people's minds. Unfortunately, 2 out of the 3 bluffs didn't work out, but it's nice that that last one did, otherwise I'd be stuck a pile of money. I played for 12 hours total for this session. I've got 0 more bullets in the chamber, so it's time to head out.
1520.
Just cashed out for 1520, so I lost around $900 today. Pretty rough day. Did a few silly things, kind of got a little nutty, and probably lost around 1,000 that I didn't necessarily have to lose, I guess. But that's all part of it. I think that the spots I chose to bluff in maybe weren't the best, but they weren't terrible. Just have to get back after it tomorrow, I guess. That's it for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, I promise that sometimes I do win. Please check out some of my prior videos and please hit the subscribe button. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. It can be poker related or non-poker related. You can let me know, how I might have messed up some of the hands in this video, or if you have any other questions, please feel free to comment. That's it for me. I will see you guys later, and good luck at the tables. We're gonna grind, 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 grind. We're gonna